Good evening and a very warm welcome to the Black Hole. Today we are going to discuss a study of gender quotas in the National Assembly of Pakistan. As an academic resource, this study highlights the need to demonstrate existing literature through the strict parameters of inquiry, models, and frameworks to achieve insight that mirrors a holistic reality of Pakistani women's political agency. We are very grateful to our guest speaker. मेरे दाईं जानिब तशरीफ़ फरमा है डॉक्टर अमीना ज़िया. She is a professor of political science and international studies at Brevard College in Asheville, North Carolina. Moreover, she has served as a United Nations Civil Society representative at Economic and Social Council since 2015. She is the CEO and founder of Blue Ridge Consulting. Also, she is on the Advocacy Committee of the US Women's Caucus. On my left sits Wajahat Malik. He's a travel enthusiast, filmmaker, MD at IBEX Films, and a wonderful host. और आज के सेशन की मॉडरेशन की जिम्मेदारी निभाएंगे. आप सब लोगों की आमद का शुक्रिया. Like every day, please do us a favor and turn your cell phones to silent mode so that there is no distraction. When the house is open for Q&A, आप ज़रूर इस गुफ्तगू में शरीक होइएगा, वरना आपकी आमद अधूरी रह जाएगी. लेकिन प्लीज़ रेज योर हैंड फर्स्ट ताकि आपको जो माइक्रोफोन दे दिया जाए और फिर आपकी आवाज़ जो है वो ऑनलाइन ऑडियंस तक भी जा सके. बस यही थी 2-3 बातें. प्लीज़ वेलकम वजाहत मलिक एंड डॉक्टर अमीना ज़िया. थैंक यू.
Well, thank you everyone once again. Welcome to Black Hole. और डॉक्टर अमीना आपका बहुत शुक्रिया कि you made some time to come to Islamabad and talk about your book, which is about the study of quotas, in the National Assembly of Pakistan for women. So, सबसे पहला जो मैं आपसे सवाल करूँगा वो ये है कि how did this interest come about? Why did you want to write a book, about such a topic which nobody's actually paid attention to? Because we keep hearing about women's quota in the National Assembly of Pakistan, but nobody's actually raised any questions. Why women's quota? Why not women actually getting elected to the assembly? So what was your interest?
Thank you, Wajahat, and thank you everyone for being here. It's a pleasure. So what motivated me to write this, Wajahat, you're right, when I started my research over 10 years ago on this, I was curious because during my PhD coursework, because my specialty is gender politics and electoral politics, we would study women politicians around the world, in emerging democracies, in transitional democracies. But when you looked at Pakistan, and during Musharraf's time, the quotas were adopted, reserved seats were adopted. But there was no literature on Pakistan at that time, and this is over 10 years ago. So just out of curiosity, it was a summer course paper. I flew into Lahore, I stayed here for an entire summer, did some field work, interviewed, I don't know how many politicians on reserve seats, women, men, minorities, etc. Because we also have reserve seats for minorities, and I realized that this was a space that hadn't been looked at, right? Usually, when quotas are adopted in any democracy, it's to ensure that there's a path for those who are not represented to be represented. And Pakistan's story was interesting because the reserve seats came down as a mandate during Musharraf's time, and General Musharraf's time. And that mandate did not fully look at the landscape, it didn't look at the environment, it did not look at whether Pakistan needed reserve seats and what kind of reserve seats, how many, women advocates were asking for 33%, which is the critical mass around the world. Pakistan ended up settling for 17 or something, right? So it was kind of this tug of war negotiation. So even from that perspective, it was interesting कि Pakistan में क्यों ये हुआ, right? Like, why was it adopted? How is it being implemented? Is it effective? So then that's the research that I did for a coursework, and that led to it's had a snowball effect. One thing led to another, and when it was time for me to pick a dissertation topic, I wanted it to be this. Because कोई book लिखी नहीं थी उस वक्त. Dr. Muhammad Wasim is a professor at LUMS at Lahore, and he looks at electoral politics. लेकिन reserve seats और gender quota पे अभी कुछ नहीं लिखा हुआ था. So that was my motivation.
Okay. Well, my take on reserved seats, I mean, we'll sort of, when we talk more, I'll come to it. But do you think these reserved seats or the quotas, if you specifically talk about quotas for women, do you think they have any, like, are they effective? I mean, do they play a better role? I mean, women are better represented in the assembly. Because we have seen that these reserved seats can also be exploited and manipulated by different parties and by different, what can I say, be it the democracy or be it the martial laws, but there's always some kind of wrangling, and we see that a lot of the time there's a lot of nepotism, and the parties don't bring women who actually deserve those seats, but it's a lot of the times कोई किसी का रिश्तेदार है तो कोई किसी की बेटी है तो किसी के जानने वाला है तो कोई किसी से फ़ायदा ले रहा है. What's your take on that?
Absolutely. That is why it's important to study, right? क्या effective है या नहीं है. So when we talk about gender quotas, your reserve seats, they're an engagement tool. So we have to kind of step back and see कि issue क्या है, challenge क्या है, barrier क्या है. The barrier for women is representation, for women to have a voice, have a say in political spaces, right? Elected spaces specifically, and be able to effectively formulate policy. So that's the issue. So the solution, according to the international community, and the solution to the development community is that we need an engagement tool, right? We need an intervention. So quotas and reserved seats are regarded as that intervention, that engagement tool that will help us fix this challenge and problem. So I think that when we talk about gender quotas, and in my book I talk about this, we have to give reserved seats and gender quotas 2 to 3 to 4 different election cycles to be able to see if we're able to see an impact. जब पहली दफ़ा किया था तो you're right वजाहत, it was somebody's sister, somebody's daughter, somebody's mother who was just filling a party seat. But with time, what that does is at least you're getting women in these political spaces. You're getting women in spaces that did not allow women to even express themselves. For example, when the quotas were implemented, there was, of course, this influx of women. And the first thing they had to do in the assembly was have additional bathrooms, additional washrooms for women. Right? Then the second thing that a lot of the politicians have recognized is that all of a sudden you started realizing that the conversation, the atmosphere, the environment within the assembly halls were changing, right? Because you had women present, so the kind of conversation that took place was now changing. It was more sensitive to ensure that okay, we have यहाँ ख़वातीन भी मौजूद है तो हमने इस तरह की बात नहीं करनी. Or and then eventually as the years progressed, we are observing that when there's a woman speaking, has a mic, she's being listened to. Whereas before somebody speaking and there's chatter going on, just normal things. So from that context, gender quotas are important because they bring women to that space. Right? So they're allowing women to take ownership of a space that is now not only a very male-dominated space.
Another question is that these women who come on the quotas, do you think they have any say in the National Assembly versus the women who are actually elected and make it to the Assembly? But I feel that what I've seen is that the women who come on the reserved seats are usually quiet. They sit in one corner. I've never seen any. Have you? I'm asking you. Any of these women play part in legislation or in policy formulation? Have you ever met anyone who's done that?
Some have. So I think let's take a step back. I think it goes back to effective training and skill set, right? So whether you're on a seat through an election or you are on a seat through quotas, right, reserve seats, if you have had some sort of skills training, if you've had some sort of idea of, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do, this is the path I'm going to, carve out, then you're going to be able to be effective, right? You have to form coalitions, you have to form relationships, build partnerships, etc. And a lot of time, actually, even right now, even when we look at provincial assemblies, a national assembly maybe obviously not, but provincial assemblies, Pakistan does not have a system where leadership and women's representation is cultivated. आपको leaders को cultivate करना पड़ता है, right? There are no natural born leaders. You have to cultivate leadership. तो वो जो एक skill set है, that is missing. जो आपने कहा कि women are sitting in the corner. Well, maybe they don't know how to engage. Maybe they don't know what they're supposed to do. They don't know the structure. They don't know the systems. And that's usually the case. I will say that those who come on seats that are elected, those women are endorsed by parties, political parties, right? So they have a political party mandate or agenda that they are following through. So the Pakistan system is a little different, where if you have an idea, if you work hard, you build coalitions, you get your voice heard, you can get traction on that policy agenda, right? Lekin if you're coming from a political party that endorses you and a party has an agenda, then they're going to make sure that it gets pushed through regardless whether you're a woman or a man.
Because normally मैंने देखा है कि जो ख़वातीन elect होके आती हैं, उनकी communication skill set is really amazing, because obviously they've come from either grassroots level or they जलसों में वो खिताब भी करती हैं, तकरीर करती हैं. So I think they are more, in many ways, their faculties are more sharpened. They have more perspective about things around them in their community. Versus women who just have been handpicked to just fill the quota. No?
I agree. And then it goes back to the training skill set. Political parties, usually have, if you're part of the political party, you're working from the ground up, ideally. And usme, you have some training, jalsa mein baat karni, ya giving speeches or creating narratives, formulating policy, discussing it, analyzing it, etc. So that is the training and the skill set that I'm talking about. What your training hai, we're lacking that for our elected officials, especially for women elected officials.
Because there are a lot of...
sorry,
go ahead.
And keep in mind, a woman politician has to work twice, if not 3 times as harder, right? Just to get their voice across, just to be heard, just so that someone is taking notice. And that's the reality, whether you're in a political space or you're in a private sector or anywhere in academia. And that's the reality. So it's more important for women to have an avenue to get that skills training.
Yeah, I get you, because I was just thinking about the ones who have been elected, men or women. I've seen a lot of them just sitting like completely dumb and deaf, So I think it also boils down to how much you want to actually represent and you want to represent. So what do you mean by representation when you say, like, what is that key word, representation?
Representation on behalf of, right? So when you are speaking on behalf of someone, or you're just there on behalf of someone who cannot be there, right? And I think there's a lot of accountability that comes with it. How do we leverage representation? How we leverage that on behalf of? I think it's important. And in representation theory, Hannah Pitkin is a renowned scholar, and her representation theory talks about representation in 4 different aspects. There's descriptive representation, formalistic, symbolic, and then substantive, right? So symbolic would mean, if you have a woman in a political space, then, of course, that's paving the way for more women, right, etc. But substantive, I think, is key, because that measures whether effectiveness is there or not, right? Whether women-friendly agendas and women-friendly policies are being introduced or being cultivated and formulated. So representation is, I think, key. And I will say that when I was, and I talk about this in my book, when I looked at representation in Pakistan, right? So think about Pakistan. The country was founded on representation, so it's a very beautiful term, and I think that when we look at it from a historical perspective, a cultural perspective, a socio-political perspective, a geopolitical perspective, I think Pakistan really tells the story of representation.
How would you evaluate the current situation in our National Assembly? Did you get to talk to any women representatives on quotas or otherwise?
I will be very honest with you. Right now, I'm kind of fascinated with Punjab's representation, right? So we've got a chief minister for the first time since the East India Company, right? The Punjab has the first female leader. And I think regardless of the nuances and everything else around it, I think that's pretty amazing. And visually on social media and everywhere else, you see her just being herself. Mariam Nawaz, she's meeting people, she's out there, she's talking about her struggles, she's talking about the challenges she had, even coming up through her political party. Keep in mind, she has cousins and so a brother and so forth, right? But she's the one that had. So there are challenges and barriers that she is very candidly speaking about during her engagements that we've noticed recently. So I'm pretty fascinated with that right now. I was talking about the 4 different types of representation. One of them, symbolic, is how do women leaders project themselves, right? We're used to Angela Merkel, we're used to Hillary Clinton, right? And these are very strong women. Benazir Bhutto, Sheikh Hasina. These are very strong women who are, who are unapologetically. They've just taken over the male-dominated space of politics. And then you have someone like Mariam Nawaz, who is very comfortable in her colorful shalwar kameez and in her, just the way she presents herself, in her femininity. That is something so unique because around the world, Wajahat, we are not seeing that with women leaders, right? Women leaders usually feel like they need to really set themselves apart to be taken seriously. And in that, somewhere along the way, we straddle between masculinity and femininity, right? And that's where you're losing that identity or you're gaining a separate set of identities. But with Mariam Nawaz's case, I think is interesting, and I hope that more young scholars research this, is that she is very comfortable in her own skin.
Okay, if you say so, because there's a lot of polarization in this country and a lot of PTI followers, and they would not agree with what you're saying, because they will have one word: dynastic politics.
Keeping that away.
I'm not
right?
a PTI supporter, by the way. But
well, Pakistan's politics is a story of dynastic politics, right? Yeah.
So so there are many lot of shortcuts. कोई कोटे से आ रहा है, कोई अब्बा जी की वजह से आ रहा है, और actually जो वाकई true representation that now I see in this country, because we have evolved. It's not the old Pakistan जहाँ पे आपको ख़वातीन नज़र नहीं आती थी. अब there are more space for women. There's a lot of women emancipation in this country. Gender equality पे भी बात हो रही है, सब कुछ हो रहा है. I personally, I mean, quotas are great. Okay, certain areas लोग representation नहीं होती, चाहे औरतों की हो या minorities की हो या दूर दराज areas होते हैं. Like you have GB and you have Waziristan and Fatas. Quotas होते हैं, understood. But what I feel is that in order to actually be a good leader, you have to come from grassroots level. You have to start from somewhere, be it your college, university, you're part of a student union, जो कि हमारे मुल्क में अभी नहीं है. पहले ज़माने में होता था. तो leaderships ऐसे ही emerge करती हैं. And for women too, now we see a lot of colleges and universities जहाँ पे there's a lot of political activity, even though students unions नहीं भी हैं. तो वहाँ पे भी students जो हैं, they are coming into, they are, उनका interest है politics में, they're coming to the fore. So I feel that if you take that route, don't you think it's better that then you have accumulated, so you have a lot of political acumen. ये नहीं कि बस आपको किसी ने सीट दे दी और आपस पे बैठ के, ठीक है सारी बातें अच्छी हैं, बट मेरे ख्याल में वो जो एक evolutionary process है, चाहे वो बंदा हो या बंदी हो, to reach that National Assembly, I'd rather see that than somebody plonked on a chair representing women. Well, that's my take, actually.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Wajahat. So I think that I think you're onto something. So I spoke about leadership training. I spoke about you spoke about the lack of student unions in Pakistan. General Zia ke time mate was when the student unions were eradicated. So there is something about that. You're right. I mean, you take an individual who has been part of, he or she has been part of organizations, planning, executing, implementing, etc. तो वो experiences जो है ना, those are learning experiences, right? That's a learning journey that you take. आजकल there's a fancy term called experiential learning, right? Hands-on learning, and that's essentially what that is. Colleges and universities are supposed to be spaces where students are able to engage in hands-on experiences, to be a president of a club, etc., right? Microcosm mein. But in Pakistan, that hasn't quite happened for a few decades now. And uska, and the impact of that, the consequence of that is that you're right. We get these individuals who end up in not just political spaces, but they also end up in leadership positions across all sectors where, they don't know how to be a leader. And a few minutes ago I said leaders are not born, leaders are cultivated. तो जब आपके पास वो incubation का system ही नहीं होगा to cultivate leaders, then you're not going to be able to have leaders who are effective. And Pakistan, there's this idea of, we are going to have one savior, one political party, one leader who's going to come and save us, right? But that's not a democracy. Ek to Pakistan is not truly a democracy, right? We call it a transitional democracy or whatever. So we have to identify that and we have to recognize and reconcile with that. Okay? And I think that the key again is going back to leadership. Leadership in universities, in colleges, and even in schools. Instilling experiential leadership programs within the national curriculum, which they do not exist. And from that, training and building skill sets and giving young people, empowering them with ownership of making decisions, looking at challenges, identifying problems, and then working towards solutions.
While you were researching your book, you must have come across, did you ever meet like any woman who came on the reserved seat? कोई ऐसी success story you can name someone? No?
So, in my book, Sherry Rahman, yes. In my book,
Hang on, वो कोटे पे आई थी? Sherry Rahman?
She was given a seat, yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that.
But in my book, when I was looking at the effectiveness of reserve seats, I realized कि वो जो एक paradigm बना हुआ है, जो एक framework बना हुआ है, that wasn't enough for Pakistan. In order to understand कि women's effectiveness in political spaces, what does that even mean? And it's not कि before reserve seats kuch ho nahi raha tha, right? So you have a massive history of women's movement in Pakistan. You have a massive history of judiciary where, which is led by women leaders, etc. But what I found was that there was no connect. Nothing was bridging the gap between, everyone was working kind of in their silos, na? I mean, we have artists and poets like Kishwar Naheed, for example, revolutionary, raising awareness, expression. The women's expression has always been there in Pakistan. Lekin usko, to try to measure it, in scholarship terms, to quantify it qualitatively and quantitatively, it's important to look at a holistic framework. So in my book, I talk about that holistic framework, right? So my book is also an academic resource that pushes students to think outside the box. So if you're studying something, if you're researching something and you don't find a framework that quite works out for your question, that's okay. It's okay to think outside the box. It's okay to take a few steps and create your own model, your own framework, as long as you're able to measure, right? And so that's what the book is about, because when I was doing this research, like I said, more than 10 years ago, I did not find a framework. So I ended up creating my own. And that holistic framework brought in historical elements, socioeconomic elements, you know, हमारे अपने cultural nuances भी होते हैं that are very important to keep in mind. And the fact, what does democracy mean in Pakistan? What does empowerment mean? How do we even define representation? And so all of those things. And then connecting the dots between the women's movement and the poetry and the literature that's coming out and music and other things, you know, academia may, and then especially also geopolitics, right? Geopolitics play a huge role within Pakistan's borders.
What actually, I mean, what were you thinking when you wrote this book? I mean, what you want scholars, academics to actually take away from your book? I mean, what you want them to grab it, you know, what exactly it is, so that they can actually work with it and disseminate that knowledge or information or wisdom to our politicians or to our, you know, NGOs that are working with actually the National Assembly representatives, like build that. काफ़ी सारी organizations हैं जहाँ पे बल्कि वो, when you were talking about leadership training and all that, there are some NGOs who are actually training senators and
Yes.
MNAs and MPAs in that context. But what do you want the people to take away from your book?
So a big chunk of the book is theory. It's just rooted in pure theory. And I think that we cannot run away from that. I think in order for us to understand what we're studying, in order for us to understand knowledge, gain knowledge, capture knowledge, we need to understand where that space is around the world, in our own community, and within us as individuals. And all of that is rooted, I firmly believe, in theory. I'm a big believer of theory, and I think that my book, the first 2-3 chapters, just dive into theory, right? आपको पहले पढ़ना है कि what has been done, right? So you're not trying to reinvent the wheel and waste time, which ends up happening. तो पहले पढ़ो, look at the history, understand the, like I said, the political, socioeconomic, geopolitical, the context of the country. Understand not just Pakistan, just in general, of the country, of कि challenges पहले क्या थे, क्यों थे, and where should we go forward, you know? And I think the theory, so my takeaway for students is, in order to try to answer questions, look at the past, study the past, understand it, contextualize it. And don't contextualize it based on what the books are telling you or the professors are telling you. I don't know if I have any professors in the audience. But think for yourself, you know? Go out there. Capture knowledge, understand knowledge. And it doesn't have to, if you're studying something about politics, it's okay to dive into art and literature and everything else around it. Because as individuals, we're very complex. As societies, we're complex. And everything is interrelated. Everything is intersectional. So use an intersectional, holistic approach to ideas, to understanding, to knowledge. And then from there, based on your own understanding of an issue, create your own research design. And I think that's the biggest takeaway, because that's what I had to end up doing. Very quickly, I want to talk about, you mentioned some of the NGOs and the research and the reports that are coming out about women's representation and have been. It's also important to understand, so this research was part of my dissertation. And when you're working on a dissertation, you have to be very careful where you're getting your data from. So a lot of data that is available in Pakistan right now, not Phildat, but other NGOs, you have to be, it's interesting because it depends on who's funding that research and who's funding that report, because it's very easy to fudge numbers and data. So for my own research, I was not able to use a lot of these reports that were out there because they just didn't meet the criteria for the PhD doctorate dissertation. So I was left with not a lot of data. So I had to create, again, a very holistic model, bring in art and poetry and historical elements and things like that. And I think that was, it made it more interesting and fun. But I think that I just want students to know that it's okay to think outside the box, because when you think outside the box, you're going to come up with amazing ideas.
You've lived in America pretty much all your life, right? You went to school there, college, you still live there. What about the American, political system? Do they have quotas for women, or like, the Native Indians?
Nope.
Nope.
The United States does not have reserved seats. We do not have quotas, and we do not have a large number of female politicians.
Okay.
End of story.
What about?
But we do, there is, I mean, this is a story around the world. It's the same story, except for some very few European countries or very few African countries, which now have massive amounts of quotas. And so we have more women politicians there. But in the US is an interesting case study because, women's representation and women's empowerment there means something very different than what it means here and in Pakistan or in other transitional democracies. And in the US being a democracy, if we can call it that, we can debate that all day as well. Women's engagement in regards to civic engagement, civic participation, it's very low. It's low. And so there are many different variables for that, and I can't compare the two.
मेरा अगला सवाल भी यही था, like you talked about you couldn't rely on the data,
Yeah.
in the reports which are compiled by the NGOs here. Did you ever get to travel to Pakistan around that time when you were writing your dissertation to actually, because sitting in America looking at things, it's sometimes there's a lot, first-hand experience,
Lost in
second-hand
translation,
experience. There's a lot of things get lost in translation and distance. So I wanted to ask you that, did you ever go to a provincial assembly or Senate of Pakistan or National Assembly, talk to male MNAs, female MNAs, and what was their take on,
So I did. My field work was in Pakistan. So I was here for 3 months. And then even after that, a lot of our politicians, male and female, do come to the US, and I have been a UN consultant for quite a long time now. So whenever, politicians would come, elected officials or those on quotas would come to the UN, I would just grab them and say, can I just interview you? And so I have spoken to a lot. And it's interesting because when you speak with any politicians, male or female, that come from an experience of leadership, like we spoke about, their conversation is different. They understand the system, they understand the policy model, they understand, what it means to, what agenda setting means, what it means to, how the system works, and how they need to collaborate, right? And each and every one of them always has said something very interesting, which is, yes, I belong to a political party, but I do recognize that if I want to get X, Y, and Z done, I need to cross party lines, and we need to make allegiances and alliances, and they do. But that goes back to experience, and those were the individuals who maybe in college were very engaged in something, and through the course of their formative years and then their early adulthood had always been engaged in something, whether it was a political party or whether it was a family business or something where they had the opportunity to develop and hone their leadership skills. It all goes back to leadership skills. And then, of course, when I would speak with women who did not have that background, a lot of times these women would be highly educated women, but they didn't have experiential learning background, and you could tell, right? And so they're waiting on somebody to advise them on a policy, or they're waiting from the political party to give them some sort of a signal which direction that they want to take. So that, again, I think goes back to experience. So yes, that was...
Now there's a lot of talk about transgenders in Pakistan. They're getting their rights, ID cards bhi unke liye ban rahe hain and all that. I don't know if there's trans quota in the Pakistan National Assembly yet.
No.
Not yet? Okay.
Religious minorities and women.
And that's it?
Mm-hmm. But some political parties do have.
Yeah, they give tickets to trans, yeah. Mm-hmm. What else? I mean, I'm asking you very layman questions, because, I don't want to get into details, but if there's anything else that you would like to add on to, and then we can open the house.
I do want to say, and I think this is something that especially with the recent current environment that we're in Pakistan, I think political parties play a key role in democracy, and I think we underplay that in Pakistan. Political parties are the guardians of democracy, essentially, or supposed to be. That's the thought behind it, and I wish that political parties would start maybe changing their structures a bit to bring women's empowerment and inclusivity at the core of their agendas, right, and at the core of their priorities. Because once they do that, then it just radiates outwards. So I think the political party structures in Pakistan, I think, need to be reimagined. Maybe they need to be revamped a little bit. And I hope that we've got Asifa Bhutto in Sindh. We've got Mariam Nawaz as the chief minister. We've got the first lady of Pakistan as well, right? So I hope that the political party structure system is looked at, because we ignore that and neglect that. But that's really where it starts from, because that's the hub of power, right? Political parties.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much that needs to be done in terms of democracy in this country. I mean, let alone political parties restructuring themselves and bringing in more women and all that. Thank you. And now we can open the house for questions, and somebody can ask a question.
Ansar Gilani, Director for Ideas Save the Human Race. As far as today's burning question and their quotas and their representation and their presence at the parliament floor is concerned, it's very vital talk you brought here. And it's a futuristic, you could say, principles to base how set lines and principles and things are to be followed and how they are to rise in coming future. But we have some, you can say, Razia Sultana history case, as you talk about the East, you can say, what you had said about East India Company since when. When we talk about East and West, it's all game of nerves. Ladies are always taken at second, even you can say in West, they took, you can say, many of the centuries and decades to rise. First as a manifestation to get right of road, then university and education right, and then emancipation, empowerment, and proper sequencing went there. But when we talk about the parliamentarian and the presidential, when Margaret Thatcher and many of the cases are present in the you can say England, how you can say Lady Diana rose above and talked and fought against the British establishment, and they were the ways for all ones and based a classless society. When we talk about the presidential system that is present in America, even you can say much fought Hillary Clinton. Finally, you can say Donald Trump rose as success case. And when we talked about the press and media talked about why the president of America, lady, is not going to be, they are of the opinion that as a president and the international gambit and the national role of America is, lady is not having such nerves, steel nerves to fight and talk and to represent America as the role is there. But when we step in Pakistan and Quota and such areas, education is not as a whole. Where tribal mindsets are there, many barriers are there. Though the Benazir Bhutto has been there, but has been nourished and developed and cultured, and their revenge and labeling cases are already there. Our father, you can say, sacrifice labeled the ways. When we talk about Mariam, it is Khan who made her the leader. How he pressed her and dragged her to the wall, and she reacted in a severe manner. But she was, you can say, wealthy lady, well off, representing to a high echelon of the society. That's why she had the voice and had the right to talk, and finally she reached at the parliament. Otherwise, if there would have not been interruptions, she might have been made Prime Minister of the day. It means In Pakistan, culture of women emancipation and rise is much. The credit all goes to revision and repetition of the political elections. Through elections, we are so aware. As far as our, you can say, education is concerned, we are going with the 70% informal economy, mean the farmers and the laborers are there. 30%, only 10% educated section of society, 10% protocol people going, 10%
अच्छा वो
armored.
थोड़ा सा
point
अगर
of view.
सवाल है तो
I am
वो
coming
पूछ
to the
लें
question,
हाँ
I'm making the pitch to be ready to throw the question.
नहीं
But
नहीं
the
वो
thing
और
is that,
सारे हाँ
we are much aware, but sacrifices are not there, waves are not there. If we trace out the pages of the history, women have never given blood to no revolution is
ठीक है
there,
जी
no blood is there, no separate, you can say, their stance that would have made the ways leveled. They are always dependent on the men's. First they are as a presentation, then they become representation. But what we have,
वो हम समझ गए नहीं नहीं वो हम आपका
big section of
थीसिस आपका मैं समझ आ
credit
गया
goes to
दानो
you can
क्रेडिट
say Pervez Musharraf. When
credit goes to Pervez Musharraf,
yes, brother, he
a
was
military dictator.
illegal, but he
What are you talking
brought
about?
the ladies,
Anyway,
to
हम
the
इधर
limelight.
ब्रेक लगाते
Otherwise, it was tribal mindset.
अच्छा
and
वो
everything was
उनसे
wrong
ज़रा
and
सवाल
nothing was
अच्छा
right.
बाकी लोग
I think we are on the route to success.
चलें थैंक यू
as far as ladies are concerned.
शुक्रिया जी
And hope is alive there.
काफ़ी लंबी स्टे बाकी मैं थोड़ा सा रिक्वेस्ट करूँगा कि टू द पॉइंट सवाल अगर आप पूछ सकें ताकि आगे से टू द पॉइंट जवाब भी आप करूँ हाँ नहीं नहीं अच्छी बात है नहीं ठीक है बिल्कुल ऐसी है जी बिल्कुल अपना नाम भी बता दें और सवाल पूछ लें
My name is Osama. Madam, I just want to ask that which one is more effective to increase women representation in politics, the quota system or the separate electorate for women?
Depending on outcome क्या चाहते हैं. Do you visibly is the outcome to visibly have more women? Yeah, the outcome is कि आप substantive policies के बारे में बात करना चाह रहे
Women
हैं.
representation increase करना मतलब
तो आप representation कैसे define करेंगे? Visible representation या substantive कुछ काम?
हाँ substantive कुछ काम हो.
तो substantive काम के हवाले से if you're looking at policies, you're looking at तो फिर elections because देखना जब when a woman is contesting elections, you're running a campaign, you're endorsed by someone, तो आप ऐसे तो नहीं start करते, right? Which means you have some sort of an experience. So that's the motivation as well, right? So that motivation, research shows us that whether you're male or female, you're going to end up doing substantive work, right? So right now in the field of gender politics, that's the debate. कि quota से हम visibility ले आते हैं, but visibility also brings a lot of other things. ना वो फिर आप एक छोटी सी लड़की बैठी है, वो देख रही है कि there are so many women politicians, तो वो कहेगी जब मैं बड़ी होंगी मैंने भी ये बनना है, तो उसका भी there's an importance and significance of that as well. वो symbolic representation आ जाती है. तो I think simultaneously, if we have both, then we're headed towards a good direction. So in countries where the number of women in political spaces is very low, quotas are necessary to visibly get the women there. देखो ना आप एक election cycle होगा, दूसरा होगा, तीसरा होगा. By the fourth, you already have women contesting elections theoretically. ठीक है ना? So that's the idea of जो reserve seats. They're not there to stay forever. It's just a temporary fix. It's a mobilizer. We can think of it that way. लेकिन आपका to answer your question, I think the women who contest elections are the ones that end up doing more substantive work.
Thank you.
I'm Saad. We rarely see women in Pakistani parliament, largely owing to our sick societal structure that doesn't encourage women showing visibility in political sphere. Only those women are considered pure and pious and perfect who are invisible and who are within the boundary of home. This, I think, is the main reason. What do you think, as you mentioned, that it is the case in most of the world?
Yes.
And you mentioned specifically first world. What major reason that you find why they are not there out there in political sphere?
That's a very good question. So the barriers है ना for women, whether it's to enter political space or whether it's to advance in their career. वो same barriers हैं. If you're a mother, if you're a caregiver of an elderly parent or an in-law, तो आपका पहली responsibility and priority is within the confines of your boundaries of your house. ठीक है? Because women disproportionately carry that burden of that work. So when you're looking at women from the from 20s all the way up to like late 40s, they're busy. They're busy raising a family. They're busy keeping their house moving, right? तो आप उस lady को कैसे कह सकते हो कि आप अब बाहर जाके spend all day in the assembly and do this and that, and then घर आके आप खाना बनाओ and take care of your kids' homework and do all that. Is that fair? नहीं है ना? तो कौन करेगा? Nobody wants to do that. So that's the reality we have to talk about. हम quotas ले आए, reserved seats ले आए, women को elections contest करने दें, none of that matters unless we recognize and identify कि जो reality है, जो barriers है हमारी society के. अब पाकिस्तानी society के अपने हैं, right? American society has there's no daycare services, there's no child care, child care is extremely important. वो वहाँ joint family systems नहीं हैं, उनके अपने मसले मसाइल हैं. When we look at Pakistan as a society and we look at women and their lives, they're very different. It doesn't matter कि आप किस socioeconomic की बात कर रहे हैं. If you've got a working woman, she needs to go out and make money. She doesn't have time to sit in the assembly, right? And she doesn't even have time to contest elections. So ये जो हमने barrier, these are the real barriers. If we want more women to enter political spaces and just mainstream spaces, we need to make sure that they have help, they have assistance, right? And we need to do that. If care facilities हों उनके लिए, but that's the reality.
Is that a workable solution, especially in our country?
Yeah, and I think that the women of Pakistan, I think the youth, I think the younger women of Pakistan need to come together and come up with the solutions कि उनको चाहिए क्या है? What do they need to advance? And I truly believe कि through a stakeholder approach, the governance structures and the civil society should really look at that and say, okay, how can we want women to come out into these political spaces, political parties especially, कि हम क्या कर सकते हैं? What can we provide them? Right? How can we ensure that they come out? Because research tells us that women leaders are more capable, no offense. In peacekeeping, in conflict management, in conflict resolution. I was just at the UN 3 weeks ago, and our UN ambassador, Pakistan's UN ambassador, Munir Akram, was hosting a conference at the Women's Conference on Peacekeeping. And I was talking about research and data, and it shows that women leaders in peacekeeping are 3 times more effective than men. And those policies and those conflict resolution agreements are sustainable 3 times longer. Just imagine that. So the data shows us, because women work harder, because they have to. They have to be taken seriously. That's just how, and it doesn't matter if you're in Pakistan or the US or you're in a European country. So that was a very good question. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, Muin Bartley here. Very nice talk. Thanks for the work. So just looking back at the past 20 years, like you said, symbolic, there's symbolic representation and then substantive. So it seems like it's moved in stops and starts, and so the intention, there may be a sort of a genuine, a positive intention, and through that you have reserved seats and quotas, but then the political system kicks in and maybe distorts the intention. So what do you think can be done to revive the original intention and to sort of revitalize this sort of goal to increase the representation and sort of revitalize the whole system? If you look back at your research and what's happened in the past 20 years, what can be done to again, with a fresh, through a fresh start or through a fresh perspective, look at this challenge again?
Thank you. That's a very good question. So I think when quotas are, they're a mobilizer, right? They're a tool. They're supposed to be a quick fix. When they're introduced, they're not just supposed to be introduced in a silo. Uske saath saath, we're supposed to have facilities where we're training these women who are coming on reserve seats, hoping that chalo ab to reserve seat se aa gayi hai, but next time they're going to contest an election, so that reserve seat opens up for someone else. Okay? So it's supposed to be this continuation in this process. So Pakistan ended up securing National Commission of Women and Provincial Commission of Women as well. Lekin the work that was supposed to come out of there was limited. You know, unke apne honge limitations, restrictions. So again, I think that training mechanism, that leadership development mechanism is not there. And at the same time, from the government side and also the political party side, right? So political parties also need to, you know, so there needs to be the stakeholder approach. Aapne pucha ki kya, what can we do, right? For a fresh start. I think that a multi-stakeholder approach is necessary to bring in different actors. Aap academia ko laye, who's doing the research and who knows the historical background. Bring in government individuals who can look at the governance structure and see where we can tailor it or tweak it a bit. Bring in civil society organizations, women's advocacy organizations who have been doing amazing work in Pakistan for decades. Bring everybody to the same table and say, this is the challenge, what can we do? And then everyone needs to come up with a solution and be on the same page, right? Jab wo same page pe honge, then it's going to move forward. Right, so the training aspect, the education aspect, the leadership, cultivating aspect, while simultaneously having space within the political parties to ensure that aapke jo junior party membership, one, how are you recruiting your party membership? Two, or how are you making sure that they have a direct path upward in their leadership? So wo sari cheezein simultaneously need to happen. And in other places, like in some of the African countries that we have seen where reserve seats were introduced, these things also took place because whoever the international agency was that was introducing it had much more of a free hand in ensuring that those other variables and mechanisms were in place as well. Whereas in Pakistan, you know, we just did 1 and 2 and we forgot the rest of the steps. So all of these steps need to work together. Like I said, you know, once someone comes on reserve seat, the next time they should not be given a reserve seat. They need to contest elections because by then they need to know how to play the game and how the system works. And then you open up that space for someone else. And just imagine that 4 election cycles go on and imagine how you can just have that impact with many more women contesting elections.
So when you talk about these steps that need to be taken
Yeah.
aside, do you think anybody is actually giving that kind of consultation to the government, to the political parties?
Ab mic use kariye.
You heard me, right? So do you think कोई कर रहा है ये काम, like हुकूमत के उससे साइड से या political parties के, civil society? I think somebody actually needs to whisper all these things to the stakeholders for the process to start somewhere.
Yeah, so the stakeholders have to be brought together, right? So somebody has to, it has to be intentional. And usually that starts from whoever is working on bringing the quotas to the country, right? Lekin hame pata hai ki that time has lapsed. So hopefully it has to be someone from a position of power to collectively bring the stakeholders together, but it has to be intentional wajahat. Right? Because if something is not intentionally done and with a collective identity, it's never going to flourish, right? Because everyone's going to want their own silos. And one thing I've noticed about Pakistan through my research, even through my consulting in Pakistan, is that everyone is very territorial. You know, if I'm working on this, okay, I'm working on this, but we cannot share knowledge. We cannot share any information, although you may be working on exactly the same thing. So ye jo territorialness hai na, it's also the, what is it, survival of the fittest, right?
Something on those lines. I also think that the political parties don't want to sort of get into that process of eliminating the quotas because उन्हें पता है यार ये सीटें हैं आराम से मिल जाएंगी क्या ज़रूरत है इलेक्शन लड़ने की लड़ाने की तो I don't think they are interested.
But the seats will always be there, right? So we're saying ke let new people, bring new people on. And political parties should want to bring new people on. You know, कि जो आ गया है, make sure that that person on the reserve seat does amazing work, कि जब वो elections contest करें, they're going to win regardless, ठीक है ना? And now that seat is open again for you as a political party to bring in someone else that you want. So the motivation is there, but I don't know if anyone's thinking of it that. You know, the problem is कि long-term strategy honi chahiye, right? You have to have objectives and outcomes. Okay, what are you hoping to happen, and what is your timeline? A lot of times, you know, Pakistan's political journey is very herky-jerky, right? So everything is very transient, kind of, you know, aaj ye hai, kal kuch aur hai. So I think that is a huge challenge. And so whoever does come in power, even with the best of intentions, are probably not able to carry out what they need to because of all of this. You know, it's like a checkered board.
Yeah.
Thank you. Qasim Khetran is there. So actually आपका जो क्वेश्चन है कि वुमेन एम्पावरमेंट इन इलेक्शन, क्या मेन की जो इलेक्शन स्पेसिफिकली पाकिस्तान जैसे थर्ड वर्ल्ड में जो इलेक्शन होते हैं या वर्ल्ड व्यू पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से क्या है, इलेक्शन होते हैं या सिलेक्शन होती है, ये बेचारे खुद क्राइसिस में है अभी तक, तो वुमेन को क्या एम्पावरमेंट देंगे और वर्ल्ड के क्या इन्फ्लुएंस है इस इलेक्शन प्रोसेस में ओवरऑल लास्ट 20 या 75 ईयर्स से?
That's a very good comment and a question. I think that's one that we're all struggling to respond to. आपने बहुत अच्छा कहा कि election है या selection है, right? लेकिन you know, I want to go back to leadership, training, learning, education. If the politicians, whether they contest elections or whether they're put on there through reserved quotas, if the politicians have the know-how, the intentions, and the motivation to do something, you know, through their political parties, because Pakistan ka political structure is political party, right? It's party system. So if the political parties are the safeguards of democracy, the power is there. Can they work together? Can they cross party lines? Can they form alliances? So that selection becomes difficult, right? If you think about it, I don't want to go in detail about it, like in, you know, in Pakistan's recent history, there have been times that political parties have joined hands to say that we're going to be strong, this is our strength, so that we don't get told what to do, right? So it's just, you know, it's a game of forming alliances and collaboration, and I keep using the term stakeholder, right? Stakeholder approach and building partnerships and crossing party lines. And I think that the future of Pakistan's pseudo-democracy, because I don't want to call Pakistan a democracy, because it's not, Pakistan's pseudo-democracy's future rests on political parties and whether they're going to be able to deliver to the civil society. Unka ek mandate hai. There's a reason political parties are there, especially in representative democracies. And the political parties have to rise up. Are they going to be able to?
I don't think there's any democracy in this country. There's egocracy, egos at war.
From the stakeholder come. They are also the byproduct of the same party.
जी डॉक्टर साहबा, थैंक यू सो मच। दिलावर हुसैन नाम है मेरा और मैंने खुद रिसेंटली जो PhD इसी पार्लियामेंट पे की है। और मेरा कमेंट ही आप कह लें या क्वेश्चन भी है, मैं थोड़ा लेट आया हूँ, मैं आपकी डिस्कशन नहीं सुन सका। जो आप बार बार एक रिपीट कर रहे थे कि ख़वातीन जो हैं जो उस पर रिज़र्व सीट्स पे आती हैं, तो एक दफ़ा एक खातून आ गई तो नेक्स्ट टाइम जो है उसको जनरल उस पर सीट पे आना चाहिए फिर। तो मेरे ख्याल में दो इश्यूज़ हैं ख़वातीन को इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में। एक तो पोलिटिकल पार्टीज़ का आपने मेंशन किया, अगर आपने पढ़ा हो इलेक्शन एक्ट 2017 जो है उसके मुताबिक हर पोलिटिकल पार्टी इज़ बाउंड के उसने 5% जो जनरल सीट्स के ऊपर वो देनी है, तो वो तो कोई भी नहीं दे रहा। एक तो वहाँ पे इशू है, वो फुफ्फो खाला चची ताई वही आ रही हैं, एक तो वहाँ पे इशू है। और दूसरा जो आप बार बार रिपीट कर रहे थे कि जनरल सीट्स पे आना चाहिए, आप मुझे, मैं UK में भी गया, वहाँ पे आप ये बात कर सकती हैं। यहाँ पे आप मुझे बताएं कि जनरल सीट्स के ऊपर क्या ये हमारे, जो मैं ख़ुद भी एक मर्द बैठा हूँ, हम ख़वातीन को एक्सेप्ट करते हैं, मैं उसको वोट दूंगा कि एक तरफ एक मर्द खड़ा होगा इलेक्शन में और एक खातून होगी, तो वो जनरल सीट्स के लिए मेरा ख्याल में अवाम भी इशू है और पोलिटिकल पार्टीज़ भी हैं। इस पर आप भी अपने कमेंट्स दीजिए, ये मेरी हम्बल एक वो आप कह लें कमेंट था। थैंक यू।
थैंक यू सो मच, आपने बहुत अच्छा कमेंट किया और क्वेश्चन भी है। लेकिन मैं आपसे सवाल पूछती हूँ, अगर एक वुमेन पॉलिटिशियन रिजर्व सीट से आई हैं और उन्होंने अपने टेन्योर में बहुत काम किया है और आप भी देख रहे हैं, हर कोई देख रहा है, उनकी कंस्टिट्यूएंसी भी देख रही है, अगर वो इलेक्शन, इफ़ शी कंटेस्ट इलेक्शन, तो आप उनको वोट देंगे या नहीं देंगे, रिगार्डलेस ऑफ वेदर शी इज़ अ वुमन, जस्ट बेस्ड ऑन द फैक्ट कि उन्होंने इतना काम किया है, या आप किसी और मर्द को देंगे?
मैं अपनी बात नहीं कर रहा
नहीं,
हूँ, मैं तो
मैं
जनरल
general,
हमारा जो
yeah.
परसेप्शन हमारा है, तो ख़वातीन को जिस तरह से हम एक्सेप्ट करते हैं ओवरऑल हमारी लाइफ में, ज़िंदगी में, और ख़ास करके सियासत में,
जी, जी.
और जिस तरह से हमारा मीडिया और उसका वो सारी चीज़ें होती हैं, मैं उस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में कह रहा हूँ। मैं बल्कि इसको सपोर्ट ही करता हूँ जो आप कह रही हैं कि उसको चीज़ रिपीट होनी चाहिए जैसे कि नेक्स्ट टाइम। मैं सिर्फ जो जनरल बिहेवियर है हमारी या सोसाइटी का, आप कह लें,
Society का.
उसके बारे में कह रहा हूँ कि जनरल सीट्स के ऊपर जो ख़वातीन को ये इशूज़ भी हैं, कंपेन करने में उनको इशू होगा, फिर उस तरह से वोटिंग बिहेवियर जो हमारे आपको देख लें ट्रेंड्स हैं, तो वहाँ पे इश्यूज़ हैं। तो मेरा यही मतलब आप कह लें, आपको बैक ही कर रहा हूँ कि इस तरह से इशूज़ होंगे
सॉरी,
जनरल
मैं
सीट्स के ऊपर।
वीव कम अ लॉन्ग वे। अभी आप देखिए ना, हमारी कितनी ख़वातीन हैं जिन्होंने इलेक्शंस में खड़ी हुई हैं पार्टी बेसिस पे, इंडिपेंडेंट भी, और इलेक्शंस जीते हैं और असेंबली में आई हैं। वो मेरे ख्याल में अब वो आप जो बात कर रहे हैं वो बहुत ही जो दूर अफ्तादा एरियाज़ हैं या कंजर्वेटिव एरियाज़ हैं, वहाँ पे इश्यूज़ हैं। जनरली ओवरऑल मुझे तो
नहीं, लेकिन कह
सच
रही है ना वजाहत कि उन्होंने अभी रिसर्च की है इस पे, तो ही हैज सीन दिस करंटली ना, तो मे बी इट इज स्टिल
रिसेंटली
देयर.
आप देख लें, अभी 2000 ये हमारे 24 के इलेक्शंस हुए हैं, 4-5 ख़वातीन जनरल इलेक्शंस पे, एक पीपल्स पार्टी की खातून है वो शाजिया मरी हैं, फिर जरताज गुल हो गई, कोई के पी से एक वो हालांकि बड़ी पढ़ी लिखी खातून थी, डॉक्टर वो जो सवेरा प्रकाश जो हैं पीपल्स PPP की थी, उनको नहीं हुआ। तो कहने का मकसद है कि 2-4 आपको इस तरह से मिल जाएंगे वजाद साहब, लेकिन ओवरऑल हमारा वो ट्रेंड नहीं है। तो मेरा मतलब ये ऑब्जर्वेशन है। आगे ज़ाहिर है अभी विद द पैसेज ऑफ टाइम 2-4 साइकिल्स चलेंगे, इलेक्शंस होंगे, तो शायद ये हो सकता है चेंज आ जाए, लेकिन अभी तक थोड़े ये मसाइल हैं वोटिंग बिहेवियर्स में। जी
थैंक यू. जो वो हमने जो सिंबॉलिक रिप्रेजेंटेशन की बात की थी ना, कि जितनी ज़्यादा दफ़ा वुमेन आएंगी इस स्पेस में, विजिबल होंगी, तो वो खुद ब खुद माइंडसेट्स भी चेंज होगा, और चेंज होने में टाइम लगेगा. लेकिन मेरे कहने का मतलब था कि अगर आप एक ख़वातीन हैं, वो आई हैं, इफ़ देयर इज़ अ वुमन, शी इज़ ऑन अ रिजर्व सीट एंड शी इज़ डूइंग अ लॉट ऑफ वर्क, ठीक है ना, वेदर आप उनको, वेदर पार्टी उनको सपोर्ट कर रही है या कोई उनका कमीशन ऑफ वुमेन सपोर्ट कर रहा है या कुछ कर रहा है, हाँ, तो उनको जस्ट मेक श्योर कि आ तो गई हैं, बट मेक श्योर दे नो व्हाट टू डू एंड व्हाट डायरेक्शन टू गो इन, बिकॉज देन the goal should be that they need to be contesting elections the next time around, right? तो जब वो contest करेंगी elections, उनकी campaigning भी has to be strategic. तो and I truly believe that if that's the case, तो हम जो ये कि I'm not going to vote for a woman but I'm going to vote for a man वाली जो चीज़ है, especially provincial assembly level पे और national assembly level पे, I don't think that would be an issue, because आप देखें ना, आप एक you're trying to weigh कि उन्होंने काम क्या किया है with somebody, you know, who's just a male. So I think that I hope so. लेकिन आप हमें बताइएगा after your next research on this.
अच्छा जी, क्विक, सॉरी मैं फिर से पूछ रहा हूँ, सॉरी अबाउट दैट। किस तरह से एम्पावर करें जो एग्जिस्टिंग पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज़ का जो स्ट्रक्चर है, जो हमारी सोसाइटी का जो स्ट्रक्चर है, तो ये जो वुमेन आगे आती हैं और जो बहुत ही मुश्किलात को ओवरकम करके वो इसमें पार्टिसिपेट करती हैं, कोशिश करती हैं, तो वो एक मतलब कंटिन्यूस स्ट्रगल और बहुत सारे मल्टीपल ऑब्स्टिकल्स, तो एम्पावर किस तरह से करें हम? जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल यूएस में देखते हैं कि एक कुछ ऐसी या नॉन प्रॉफिट्स कह लें ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस जो कि देख रही होती हैं कि कौन सी वुमेन हैं जो कि जिनको सपोर्ट किया जाए टू कंटेस्ट, तो वो उनको जाके वो अप्रोच करते हैं, बाद दफ़ा उनको लेकर आते हैं, क्योंकि यहाँ जो एक पॉलिटिक्स इज़ अ डर्टी गेम जो एक लेबल हुआ है, उसको किस तरह से ओवरकम करें? तो क्योंकि अभी तक तो इट्स नॉट रियली वर्किंग, तो वही जो आप कह रही हैं ना, आउट ऑफ द बॉक्स, तो किस तरह से समहाउ टू मेक दिस एम्पावरमेंट को किस तरह से करें within parties, within society?
That's a very good question. Thank you for asking. So I think there are two answers I would like to give. One is and I believe truly that both things need to happen simultaneously. One thing है, आपका एक huge youth bulge है, ठीक है, उस youth bulge में women भी हैं, right? Young women भी हैं. उनको अभी से they need that, again, the education, the training, वो जो experiential learning की training है, they need that. So instilling that in the national curriculum, ठीक है, so that they are already exposed to that. तो उनमें एक motivation होगी, you know, you're cultivating, developing leadership. उसमें एक identity develop हो रही है कि I'm a leader in my own space, my own community, my own neighborhood, etc. तो वो जो identity एक इंसान की होती है, grows, right? It radiates. तो वो करना बहुत ज़रूरी है because you can't just ask a grown woman कि now you need to do this. ठीक है, ये चीज़ आती है, you cultivate it, you formulate it. तो that needs to happen on an education curriculum level. कि आपको एक experiential learning, leadership program, leadership development, and you know, in the West, this is very common, and this has been common for decades now. लेकिन पाकिस्तान में leadership is just kind of a very detached thing from education. तो leadership को education में लाना, I think, is very important, especially with the youth bulge, for both women and men. The second way I would like to respond to this is कि simultaneously आपने mention किया कि बाहर की countries में there are always these NGOs like Molly's List, Emily's List that are spaces for women. If I want to run for election, मुझे पता है कि I can go to them, I can take a course, I can network, come up with my own connections, and immediately I will gain my political funding base भी होगी, फिर like-mindedness भी होगी. You know, there's a support system. तो वो यहाँ, those organizations don't exist, and those organizations are very important, and those organizations cut across party lines. ठीक है ना? Because they are specifically there to help support women contest elections. They're there to help women understand कि अगर आपने ये करना है, this is how you're going to do it. This is the roadmap. एक roadmap. और जो Pakistani women wanting to go into the political space का roadmap is going to be very different than any other country in the world. ठीक है? हमारे अपने बहुत से nuances हैं. तो the roadmap needs to be there, but it also needs to be backed with a solid support system, from finances to network to education training, etc. तो वो एक पूरा एक framework है जो develop होना चाहिए पाकिस्तान में, and I think that's the only way we can push this forward.
Well, आखिरी सवाल, उसके बाद हम सेशन को conclude करेंगे. Thank you.
Okay, my question is that as we are in Pakistan, so there is an influence of definitely our religion. So it's a conflict, it's a big conflict as we are talking about females. So do we have any way out, or we can say that how we can accommodate this conflict in Pakistan? So definitely it is somehow internalized in females that they have to be, you can say, at a secondary level, not they have to play a very primary role. So how we can accommodate this conflict in Pakistan?
Thank you for asking that. You asked a question that no one has touched yet. In Pakistan, that's a huge variable. I would like to answer that with stakeholder approach, right? Stakeholder approach. आप religious scholars or clerics को भी साथ लाइए. और कि we have identified these as challenges. How do we collectively work together? और इसके लिए buy-in from the religious community is very important. और जब हम डेमोक्रेसी या वुमेन एम्पावरमेंट की बात करते हैं तो वी ऑलवेज सेपरेट द टू. यू नो, रिलीजन इस साइड पे होता है, एनी डेवलपमेंट की बात देख लीजिए, रिलीजन एक साइड पे होता है, अपने साइलो में होता है, एंड एवरीथिंग एल्स इज हैपनिंग हियर. तो व्हाई नॉट ब्रिंग देम टुगेदर? ठीक है ना? व्हाई नॉट क्वोट द कुरान एंड द हदीस? व्हाई नॉट ब्रिंग इट टुगेदर? वी शाई अवे फ्रॉम इट. हम कहते हैं कि बस रिलीजन ऐसी चीज़ है जो हमारी सोसाइटी और हमारे कल्चर को रिस्ट्रेन कर रहा है, रिस्ट्रिक्ट कर रहा है. लेकिन क्यों रिस्ट्रिक्ट कर रहा है? बिकॉज वी नेवर इंक्लूड दैम. We should include the religious scholars and the clerics in that conversation. And I'm not saying कि पहली दफ़ा आप ये stakeholder approach करें and everybody's going to get along. No, it's probably going to take multiple times of getting together and some very difficult conversations to finally, लेकिन वो intention होनी चाहिए ना. The intention needs to be there. So I think in Pakistan, everything is done top down, right? So top से somebody has to come up with this brilliant idea कि हमने ये करना है, हमने हर किसी को एक कमरे में लाना है, and we're going to continue doing this until we find a solution, until we find a common ground for everyone, you know. And I think that is probably, लेकिन जो religious की आपने बात की है, definitely there are elements of religiosity, you know, जो women empowerment, खाली politics नहीं, women empowerment की space में, you know, they conflict. तो वो चीज़ हमने बहुत एक साइडलाइन कर दी है. Being an Islamic republic, we need to bring that in. We need to embrace it. And I think जब हम embrace करेंगे ना, तो वो जो एक buy-in है, वो male community से ही आएगा. You know, the fathers have to understand it, the husbands have to understand it, the brothers have to understand it. और वो उसी वक्त होगा जब आप religiosity को अंदर लाएंगे development के अंदर. I hope that answers your question.
जस्ट अ ब्रीफ रिमार्क, क्योंकि हम कंक्लूजन की तरफ ही जा रहे हैं. वो भी अभी जो आपने इख्तितामी जुमला बोला उसी से मेरे जहन में आया. देखिए, जनरली जमहूरियत के तो बहुत मसाइल हैं. ज़ाहिर है ये जितने आगे की हम रिप्रेजेंटेशन की बात कर रहे हैं, ये तना ही मजबूत नहीं है तो शाखें क्या मजबूत होंगी. लेकिन जो भी है वो भी गनीमत है. आपने जिक्र किया कोटा सिस्टम से विजिबिलिटी आती है, उसकी सिग्निफिकेंस है, बिल्कुल ठीक है, एक स्मॉल स्टेप है, लेकिन इन द लॉन्ग रन ज़ाहिर है ये भी नीडेड है. अल्टीमेट गोल मैं समझता हूँ विमेंस इमेंसिपेशन इन जनरल, और इन पर्टिकुलर जो है वो पॉलिटिकल डिसीजन मेकिंग में जो है वो उनकी पार्टिसिपेशन हो. ये हम सब यही चाहते हैं. और ये अगर होगा तो हम एक कदम उठाएंगे टुवर्ड्स अ मोर इंक्लूसिव, अ मोर प्लूरलिस्टिक सोसाइटी. एक ऐसी सोसाइटी जहाँ पे डिस्क्रिमिनेशन नहीं है, जहाँ पे ऑपरेशन नहीं है, और बिल आखिर जहाँ पे इक्वल सिटीज़नशिप हो. और उसके लिए हमें ये मानना होगा कि हमारे जो सोसाइटल एटीट्यूड्स हैं, थोड़ा सा आपने ज़िक्र भी किया, मजहबियत का जो एलिमेंट आ जाता है ख़वातीन को कुचलने के लिए पॉलिटिक्स के अंदर भी, और इवन वो ख़वातीन भी जो प्रिविलेज्ड हैं उनके लिए भी बड़े मसाइल होते हैं. मेरा ख्याल है 90s में मैं बचपन से ही सुनता आ रहा हूँ बेनज़ीर के साथ किस तरह का सलूक हुआ वहाँ पे मजहबी क़ुव्वतों की तरफ से. तो पॉलिटिकल गेन के लिए ख़वातीन को ओप्रेस किया जाता है, विच इज़ वेरी बैड. हमें अपने सोसाइटल एटीट्यूड्स को, अपने कल्चरल नॉर्म्स को एड्रेस करना चाहिए, और एक मेरा ख्याल है कि इंकरेजिंग माहौल बनाना चाहिए. और वो शुरू होगा गली मोहल्ले घरों से, जिस तरह कि आपने जिक्र किया, भाइयों, हस्बैंड्स, फादर्स. ये इन्वायरमेंट बनेगी तो ये बाज़गश्त जो है आगे तक जाएगी. बस मैं ये कहना चाहूँगा. आपकी आमद का शुक्रिया. हमें बहुत खुशी होती है जब यहाँ स्टेज पे ख़वातीन की रिप्रेजेंटेशन हो. हम चाहेंगे कि यहाँ पे भी इक्वल रिप्रेजेंटेशन हो. एंड एज अ रिप्रेजेंटेटिव ऑफ TBH आई विल इनकरेज कि यहाँ जो हमारी ऑडियंस है इसके अंदर भी ज़्यादा ख़वातीन हो, स्पीकर्स में से भी ज़्यादा ख़वातीन हो, और ये
बहुत शुक्रिया. थैंक यू नियर. बड़े अच्छे अलविदाई कलमात थे. Thank you very much, Dr. Ameena. It was a very interesting and enlightening conversation, and it was also, quite learning. It was a learning experience for me because we don't know, because nobody talks about quotas for women in the National Assembly. मुझे ये बताएं कि आपकी अगर किताब किसी ने पढ़नी हो तो कहाँ से मिल सकती है?
Folio Books is a publisher, so it will be available. We're delayed, very Pakistan style. तो इंशाल्लाह आई थिंक मंडे को हो जाना चाहिए. इट शुड बी आउट ऑन मंडे इंशाल्लाह. या
चले जी, मंडे को इनकी बुक शाये हो जाएगी. फिर हम इनसे राब्ते में हैं तो मैं आप सबको बता दूंगा नेयर के थ्रू कि कहाँ से लेनी है और कहाँ से मिलेगी.
Vijat, I would like to say one closing thing.
Actually, you close it. I'm done. Bye bye.
Vijat को जल्दी है घर जाने की. I just want to say कि as a professor, as a mother myself, as a business owner myself, जहाँ भी women की conversation होती है ना, I try to bring my 7-year-old Lana. Lana, can you raise your hand? She doesn't want to raise her hand. I like to bring her there because, and I would encourage everyone in the audience to bring your kids, boys or girls. Because, वो इसी age से इनके mind में they're absorbing everything. ठीक है ना? तो इनके mind में आ रहा है कि ये चीज़ important है. हम समझते हैं कि अभी बच्चे हैं, they don't understand anything, but till the age 7 or 8 they're absorbing like sponges in their mind. And so I think it's important कि हम इनको talks पे लेके जाएं, इनको have them take ownership of spaces like these. बस मैं यही कहना चाहूँगी कि please encourage आपके nieces, nephews, kids, grandkids. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.